Good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Emily Summer, and I am the book buyer here at East City Bookshop. It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. Thank you so much for coming out. We are especially thrilled if it's your first visit to the store, and we hope that you will come back. If you have not already, please sign up for our e-newsletter, which we only send once a week, not too often. And you can find out about other excellent book talks like this one and our mini book clubs and all the other fun things we have going on. We are also delighted that this event is being streamed virtually for those of you who can't be in the shop or in DC tonight. So if you're watching along at home, we're glad that you're here as well. Before we get to tonight's conversation, a couple of housekeeping notes. There will be time for audience questions at the end of Twan and Lou's conversation, so please hold your questions until then. And we're in a small enough space that we'll ask you to deliver your questions without a microphone. And then I'll ask Lou and Twan, one of them will repeat the question into the microphone for the benefit of the people who are watching from home. If you need a bathroom, it is upstairs past our cash register and our greeting cards. And most importantly, if you still need a copy of The House of Doors, there will be plenty of time to purchase before you leave. Those copies will also be upstairs, and you can go get them down if you'd like to purchase them. And then Twan has graciously already signed them, but is willing to personalize if you'd like them personalized. So now for the reason that we're here. Tan Twan Eng was born in Penang, but lived in various places in Malaysia as a child. He studied law through the University of London and later worked as an advocate and solicitor in one of Kuala Lumpur's most reputable law firms. His first novel, The Gift of Rain, was longlisted for the Man Booker in 2007. His second, The Garden of Evening Mists, was a major international bestseller, shortlisted for the Man Booker in 2012, and won both the Man Asia Literary Prize of 2012 and the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. The House of Doors, published just yesterday, is already headed into its third printing and is his third novel to be longlisted for the Booker Prize, whose prize committee called it a masterful novel of public morality and private truth, examining love and betrayal under the shadow of empire. If you have attended or watched any of our events in the past, you know that I always say that I only volunteer to host the events in the store for books that I really feel strongly about. And oh, did I love this book. I was thoroughly captivated by The House of Doors, which took me to Malaysia and South Africa, to the first half of the 20th century, into the lives and secrets of Leslie Hamlin and Ethel Proudlock, and into the work of Somerset Maugham, or Willie, as he's known to his friends in this book. I felt while reading The House of Doors the same way I did when reading Michael Ondaatje's The English Patient, engrossed, enthralled, transported, and utterly moved. In conversation with Twan tonight is Louis Bayard, whose acclaimed novels include The Pale Blue Eye, adapted into a #1 Netflix release starring Christian Bale, Jackie and Me, ranked by the Washington Post as one of the top novels of 2022, the national bestseller Courting Mr. Lincoln, Roosevelt's Beast, The School of Night, The Black Tower, and Mr. Timothy, as well as the highly praised young adult novel Lucky Strikes. A New York Times notable author, Lou has been nominated for both the Edgar and the Dagger Awards, and his work has been translated into more than a dozen languages. He is also our neighbor here on Capitol Hill and a dear friend of East City Bookshop, and we are always so grateful when he agrees to be a conversation partner. Twan and Lou, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you.
Now, yeah, I had a feeling. Welcome to all of you. I'm so glad you could come out and enjoy this experience. So, Twan, this is your first time on the East Coast of the United States. Can you tell us about that? Come.
Well, it's the first time I'm on the East Coast of the US. The last time I was in America was in 2008, Seattle and San Francisco, to do a book tour for my first novel, The Gift of Rain. So I arrived in New York last Wednesday, 2 nights in New York, 2 nights in Boston, 2 nights in Springfield. Last night was Brooklyn for the launch at the Center for Fiction. Tonight's here. Tomorrow, Chicago. The day after that is Nashville for the Southern Festival of Books. And then after that, I fly back to New York, but not even the city, to the airport. And then I catch the flight back to London to spend a few days there.
So you are being launched in a major way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. What are your thoughts coming to East Coast America? You talked about how big everything, how vast everything is. Yes.
It's the scale is huge. Buildings, roads, avenues, especially New York. I found Brooklyn to be more easy to get a feel of because the scale is more human. I think everything is smaller, but it's still massive. I'm still getting the grips with it. DC, I'm very impressed with because it looks so clean. Even the buildings are sparkling, and I don't know how you all do it, but it is. The buildings look new. Even the historically old ones, they all look new.
So you're leaving tomorrow. What time? Super early.
My flight is at noon, so I suppose I have to leave my hotel at 9:30.
What is it? Reagan National? What are we?
I think it's Dulles.
Oh yeah.
What is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
That's not nice.
You got a ways to go. So in the few hours Twan has left, what do we recommend he do and to get the truest experience of DC?
Get some sleep, I suppose.
So many things I told you, so many things I want to talk to you about this book. The first time I heard this was about Somerset Maugham. I was like, ooh, because I love Somerset Maugham. But I don't know that he is as familiar a name now to younger generations that he would have been to mine, for instance.
To ours.
Well, I was trying to spare you that.
We're the same generation. Yes, I agree with you. It's quite interesting because when I mentioned his name to younger people, they have no idea who he was. And yet, years ago, when I started on this novel, I checked on the internet, and his American publishers had actually set up a Facebook page for Somerset Maugham, and it had about 200,000 followers. So I think there's still a huge amount of interest in Somerset Maugham, but it's slowly waning. We have to accept it. It's
But what is that about? Why do you think it's waning?
Well, I suppose his books are considered old-fashioned because most of his novels were written almost 50 to 60 years ago, if not more.
100 years ago.
Hundreds of years ago as well. Yes.
Yeah.
And the writing style, reading tastes have changed over the century. And he wrote mainly about the people he knew best, his own kind, white people, European people. And it is difficult, I suppose, today for any publisher to market his books because they were really about a limited social milieu of people, expats in colonies or expats in France or Paris, things like that. It's sad. Yet I feel that his short stories will be the ones that will endure better than his novels. Some of his novels aren't quite easy to read these days in terms of the quality as well. We were talking about
Human Bondage, which
yes.
is a slog.
Yes, it was a slog. I had to read the whole thing because I was writing this one. I had to read a few of his novels, and it was a slog to read some of them.
But just to be clear, he was hugely successful in his day. By the time this book starts, he's published, I think, 8 novels. He's had 4 plays running in the West End in London at the same time, 2 short story collections, and then at some point he was the highest paid writer in all of England. Yes,
and not to mention all the articles he wrote from American magazines. Mainly American magazines were paying him a lot of money for his articles, for his travel articles, and also to serialize his short stories and his novels. It was a different market then in those days when a writer could actually make money writing books.
Short stories,
not like today. So and he was quite canny. If you think about it, he's the only writer even today who has a trademark that you can recognize instantly, easily, and that's the symbol that he used in all
the
his
visual
novels.
trademark.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because if you look at books on a bookshelf and there's a little logo that you know straight away, it's Somerset Maugham's book. which other author today has a logo or a symbol? Even the really successful ones. J.K. Rowling doesn't have a symbol. Stephen King does not have one. Grisham doesn't know. So he was canny. He knew how to market his books and himself.
And so many of them were sold for adapted to film. And
Yes.
no, he was. I think 50 years ago there'd be nobody in a bookstore in DC or anywhere who wouldn't know who Somerset Maugham was. I think he was that much of a presence.
I think he wrote for money as well. His primary objective in writing was to make money.
And what's wrong with that? What's wrong?
And he wrote plays. To him, plays were more lucrative, so he could make money faster by writing a lot of plays. So he saw himself as a playwright, I think, in the beginning.
But he was also, as you make clear in this book, an outlier. He was an orphan from an early age, raised by elderly relatives. He had a very bad stammer,
yes,
which persisted, by the way, to the end of his life. I
yes.
saw a 1955 interview with him on YouTube, and it's still there,
yes,
along with a little bit of a stutter. And of course, he was
gay.
He was gay,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Talk about that.
Well, he was in his 20s when the Oscar Wilde trials happened, so that affected him. I think that scared him very much. So all his life he had to hide and conceal. He married a woman, Siri Maugham. Siri Wellcome, her original name was Siri Wellcome, and she was the daughter of the Wellcome pharmaceutical founder. And she had an affair with the founder of Selfridge's department store as well, Henry Selfridge. So Somerset Maugham used to hate it when he saw a welcome mat at the front of his house with Selfridges written on it, because he knew that it was a present from Siri's former lover, and he hated that. She and I think she's been much maligned as well as his wife, mostly by him, I think. So this is a situation which Maugham found himself. He was married, he had a daughter, but he was gay, so he traveled the world to escape his marriage with his secretary, who was male. In those days, you only had male secretaries, not female. And in this novel, he's traveling in Penang and with Gerald Haxton, the secretary.
And Gerald, of course, can't go back to England because.
Well, the rumors were that he was arrested for public indecency in a public loo. And Maugham's wife, who knew a lot of high-up people, actually pulled some strings to get him exiled, banned from the country, because she knew that Maugham was really in love with Gerald. So she did everything to make sure that he could never set foot in England again. That's why Maugham was extra bitter against his wife as well, for this reason.
And that's why he never really lived in England again.
No,
right? Yeah.
no,
after that,
yeah.
he traveled the world, lived in
Cap Ferrat. He ended up buying a villa in the south of France, and on the front wall of his property, he had his huge symbol painted on it as well. This again, marketing. He was photographed standing in front of it by magazines and newspapers with that symbol there. So he was very intelligent, I have to say.
But it seems to me that the stuff that made him an outlier made him a writer. Is that fair to say?
I would say that's what happens with most writers as well, isn't it? It's because we don't fit into any worlds that exist, so we have to create our own. We have to create our own worlds in writing, and for him, his fans, his readers saw Somerset Maugham as a member of the establishment because of his success, because of the way he dressed, because of who he mingled with in London, high society. But the establishment saw him as an outsider. He was never really accepted by them. So he belonged nowhere. And he only belonged in his writing, and finally in his villa in the south of France.
The stammer makes me ask you a technical point, because you have to convey the dialogue of a stammer. Yes. How did that work for you? And there are lots of ellipses in this dialogue.
I use ellipses. It's much harder to convey a stammer than a stutter, because with a stutter you can do I made it clear for the reader right at the start what the difference between the two is, so that I could get away with a lot of my dialogue. Basically, I just at random when I'm writing what he's saying, I just chose a word at random where to put the ellipses in. It didn't matter where, just put it somewhere, and that's. But I know this sort of tricks can get tiresome for the reader, so after a while, I just don't do it anymore because the reader knows that he stammers, and there's no need to keep highlighting the point anymore.
I'm thinking of the King's Speech, where
Yes.
the character is a similar issue,
Yes.
but somehow seeing Colin Firth stammer is okay. It's at some level, right? Reading it on the page is sort of it's
hard.
It's harder,
yes,
isn't it?
It's harder.
It's harder.
That's why when I discovered that he had the stammer, I said, "Oh no, why couldn't you have had a stutter instead?"
So I gotta ask you, did the book start with Somerset Maugham, or what was the origin story of this?
The origin story started with me reading the letter, one of his short stories, when I was a teenager. I found the story very compelling, very, very scandalous to read, very exciting. When I finished reading it, I did some research. I was in my teens, and I discovered that Maugham had based it on a real life murder trial which had taken place in Kuala Lumpur, where I had grown up and where I was living. That murder trial of Ethel Proudlock, which had taken place 100 years earlier. She was the first English woman in colonial Malaya to be charged with murder. Her story was that she was alone in her home one night while her husband was out dining with his friend, and this man called William Stewart came to visit her, and subsequently she shot him. She killed him. Her defense was that he had tried to rape her. The only flaw in her defense was that she shot him 6 times, and 4 of the bullets were in his back as he was running away. So it didn't look good for her. And from that, there's this story which Somerset Maugham heard on one of his travels. He wrote the letter. So the idea for this novel was seeded a long time ago.
With the letter.
Yes.
It's hard to explain to people, again, of a younger generation, what a huge hit the letter was, particularly as initially as a play.
Couple of plays. It was revived many times. It was staged many times. Made him a lot of money again.
Oh my gosh!
Yes, yeah.
But then, of course, as a film, most famously starring Bette Davis. We talked about this. Your issue with Bette Davis,
my issue was that she was just too strong to play this timid English woman who was accused of killing her attacker in self-defense. Because in Maugham's the letter, you're not sure whether she's capable of it until the final page, the final sentence, when we see a glimpse of the real woman beneath this timid exterior. But with Bette Davis, you know straight away, if she means to shoot someone, she means it, and she's got to aim, and she will kill that man. So I found that she was just too strong an actress to play this mild-mannered woman. Yes.
We talked about that. If you go on YouTube, there's a early talkie version of the letter starring Jean Eagles, who was a very well-known actress in her day, who died, I think, within a few months of the movie coming out, was nominated for an Oscar. But it's a role that attracts actresses. What is it about? What is it about Leslie, the character in the...
Well, first of all, if you're an actress, it's a juicy role because you have such a range to show off. You start off with this very careful, well-mannered, shy woman who's married, has a daughter, very conventional, and then you're accused of killing somebody. And what were the motives for that? So you have this great role for an actress to exhibit her abilities to play this wide range of emotions.
Now, the letter is something that we would classify today as melodrama.
Yes.
How do you work with melodrama in our 21st century vein? How do you?
Well, I suppose you underplay it.
Yeah.
I learned from writing my first and second novels that less is more. Well, some of the critics wouldn't agree with that with the first book. They say I overwrite, but over the years I've learned that a scene is so much more powerful for what you don't say or describe than what you do say. So with my way is just to leave a lot to the reader's imaginations and not say more than what's necessary. It's a difficult balancing line, I think, because I don't know when to stop. So and it only comes when you rewrite and rewrite, and then you discover, okay, this is a bit too overripe and fruity here, the scene, and you have to tone it down. It takes. So you really have to have an ear for the music of language, of the words we use. You have to find the exact right words, and it's hard. You have to train through training, I suppose.
I remember Lillian Hellman, who was kind of accused of melodrama in her day, saying melodrama just means you care what's going to happen next, and I think that's true of Somerset Maugham. I don't think he's considered a great writer per se, a great stylist, but I considered him always a great storyteller. I feel like you just keep reading it because you want to know what happens next.
Well, again, it comes down to his because he wanted to sell his books, so he had to hook the reader right from the first page, and a lot of his subject matters were considered scandalous in his day, and he knew scandal sold. So, and that's one of the reasons why he was focused on these subjects. But to be fair to him, now we all have this impression that Maugham wrote only about adultery and murder and lust,
unhappy marriages,
and unhappy. But actually, he was right. He was writing about hypocrisy. He was writing against the hypocrisy of society, and it was through these stories of lust and murder and affairs that he was pointing out the hypocrisy of how society treated these transgressors. So he was actually doing that very subtly. I suppose for one reason, he was a victim of society's hypocrisy as well. So he felt its sharp sting. And yet, like all of us, like every one of us, like every human being, he was also a hypocrite in his own way. So it's a circle.
The book is set in Penang, which is where you were born.
I was born there. Yes.
Yeah. For those who don't, it's one of the islands in the Malaya.
It's in the Straits of Malacca, so it's on the west coast of Malaysia.
Was it important to you to set it there?
Well, for various reasons, for the plot again. So the plot had to be in Penang because that's where another real life character in the books, Dr. Yat-sen, had his activities there. So I wish I could have set it in Kuala Lumpur where the murder trial had taken place, because then it would have been easier for me to write it instead of having to describe both locations and having to find a reason for Leslie to go down to Kuala Lumpur. It was that's
and for them to be friends.
Yes, it was. But I had to set it in Penang because of Dr. Sun Yat-sen. He had his headquarters in Penang, in Armenian Street. For those of you who don't know who he is, he was a Chinese revolutionary.
Yes.
You all know him, so I don't. Yes.
Hands.
Okay. So he was there for 6 months, and he lived.
Tell us who he was, Dr.
Sun Yat-sen. He was born in Hong Kong, Guangdong in mainland China, and then he moved to Hong Kong to study. And his brother had a business in Hawaii, so he spent some of his childhood in Hawaii. He spoke English fluently. He dressed like a Westerner. He was one of the first Chinese people to cut off the Manchu braid, the queue they call it. He cut that off, which would have been a death sentence for any of the people living in China in those days. It was a sign of rebellion. So he traveled the world raising funds for his revolutionary activities, which he wanted to bring down the Chinese monarchy and replace it with a republican system. So he spent about 6 months in Penang to get money from the overseas Chinese, the Chinese diaspora, and that's where Leslie, my character, meets him. And he had this headquarters for his party in a real street called Armenian Street, and that headquarters is today a little museum to Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Now, my dad grew up on that street in the 1950s. So when I was a kid, he was always telling me about Dr. Sun Yat-sen, and I had no idea who he was talking about. I thought he was some medical practitioner who lived down the road. It was only much later when I discovered who Dr. Sun Yat-sen was, and I thought that's quite amazing that my dad lived a few doors away from this house. And again, that's one of the seeds for the House of Doors.
So much of the book not a good chunk of the book is about the Chinese Revolution. So China at this point is not a superpower.
No,
It's been carved up by
yes.
England and France and
and
Germany
all the European
and all the
powers. Yes,
yeah, and they're struggling. The monarchy is
tottering, about to fall.
and
Yes,
toppled.
yeah.
And so, talk to us about that. Why does this filter back down to Malaysia? What's going on there?
Well, because of the overseas Chinese, a lot of the Chinese left China generations ago because of their motherland was in trouble. There was famine, there was natural disasters, there was a corrupt government. So I suppose it's much like today when people leave their nations and become to go elsewhere to find a way to make a living, to survive. So a lot of these Chinese people ended up in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. They became successful, and Dr. Yat-sen saw them as an easy source of money, because he worked on the guilt factor as well, I suppose. Just give me money because I'm trying to save our motherland and all that. So he came to America as well. He did a lot of fundraising,
and he was he grew up in Hawaii as well.
Yes, he grew up, but he traveled all across America raising funds from the Chinese communities here.
It's clear from the book that he was a deeply charismatic figure.
He was, and he was very good looking as well, so that helped. He had a lot of women fans. He had a lot of wives, I think 4 or 5. There's no official count, so I don't know. I can't be sure how accurate I am. He had a lot of female admirers.
So you must have felt you struck the motherlode. You had Somerset Maugham, you had, well, at some point, and you had Sun Yat-sen.
Yeah, and Ethel Proudlaw.
And Ethel, and
Gerald Haxton, the secretary.
Gerald Haxton, the hot secretary.
I thought I did. I thought I struck the motherlode, and then I realized how difficult it is to write about real life people. It is so restricting and constricted. I couldn't, every time I had an idea for a direction for the plot to move, then I realized that it can't work because of these characters' personalities. It felt false. I wanted Somerset Maugham to attend more parties, to hear more stories, but no, because he hated going to parties. He because of his stammer. He hated being touched. He hated being surrounded by crowds. So there's only one party scene in there, isn't it? So yes, that's the person who actually. Again, there's the impression that Somerset Maugham traveled the world and he sat down and listened. He talked to people and he sat down, and they confessed their deepest secrets to him. But in actual fact, a lot of the secrets were confessed to his secretary, Gerald, who was the party man, outgoing, gregarious. He loved drinking, whoring, gambling. So there's a story that they were traveling somewhere one night, and Somerset Maugham had already gone to sleep in his hotel room, and Gerald was out whoring and drinking and gambling. But sometime around
whoring with men, just to be
be
fair, yeah.
And sometime around midnight, he rushed back to the hotel room and started banging on Somerset Maugham's door and said, "Willie, you have to wake up. You have to wake up. I've just heard the most incredible story, and if I don't tell you now, I'm going to forget it tomorrow morning. So wake up." And that's how I think a lot of his stories were acquired.
Well, it raises an interesting question because the letter, of course, comes from that came from talking to people. Yeah. So much of his material came from other people's experiences, and they weren't always too happy about this.
No.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
Well, the problem with Somerset Maugham was that sometimes he was so I don't want to call him lazy, but so unconcerned that he couldn't even be bothered to change the characters' names. Or he would just change the spelling one way, which I've done here as well, just slightly.
I know,
yes,
Leslie,
yes.
So
when and oftentimes his travels would bring him back to, for instance, back to Malaya a few years after he had published his short stories, which had angered the locals there. Yet he said in an interview that yes, sometimes when I go back to those places, people come up to me and scold me or show their anger at me. But there are also people who are also angry at me because they had told me their stories and I didn't write about them. So he lost it both ways.
But it does raise sort of the ethical question. I hate to introduce ethics into fiction because we'll never survive that query. But what do you feel like? What do you feel responsibility either to the people that you know or to the historical figures as they?
I feel a responsibility to representing the historical figures as accurately and as authentically as I can. Hence, I do a lot of research. But research, just replicating the research in a novel it's dead. You have to breathe life into the character. So at a certain point, you have to drop the research and start seeing these characters as human beings, actual human beings with the same hopes and fears we all have. So it's very hard to do that. And if you want to talk about how was Somerset more ethical in doing that, well, what do you expect when you tell a big mouth writer your deepest secrets? What do you think he's going to do with it?
You're secretly hoping.
Yes. What do you? So it's also it depends on. There's also a scene in the House of Doors where I try to address this issue of confession, and Robert, one of the characters, Leslie's husband, says that everybody wants to confess what they've done, the bad things they've done, and sometimes the fact that you've gotten away with something bad and nobody knows about it is even more unbearable than the fact that somebody knows about it. You want the world to know, look at me, I'm so clever, I got away with this, and nobody knows about it. Nobody.
Right. So the ethics it's an ethical problem for all of us. We're all looking
yes.
for absolution or something from everything. Oh my gosh. So we talked about the ethics. Let's talk about Leslie, because she is I think fictional character.
She is a fictional character.
And she Mom dismisses her twice, I think twice, and it's just another bored colonial,
just another unhappy housewife in the colonies.
Yeah. But he learns something different.
Yes,
over the course of.
Well, they start off as they're quite wary of each other because they know Leslie knows about Maugham's reputation. Her husband has warned her about him. And Somerset Maugham finds Leslie very dull and uninteresting. But it's only until they slowly start sharing small stories to begin with. Maugham tells her about his childhood, unhappy childhood. She tells him a bit about herself. And I think that's when it's when people say strangers become friends when they share meals together. But I think strangers become friends when they share stories. A shared meal warms the stomach, but a shared story warms the heart. And this is what they're doing. They're feeling out each other in their own ways. And as I give them a payoff, there's something almost like a sex scene towards the end. It's not, but it's almost like
in the water.
Yes, yeah. So that's the payoff for them emotionally for them.
But the thing is, because Leslie is a storyteller, we don't necessarily know that what she's telling us is the truth.
That's she's quite careful about what she says. So she also wants to present her best side to people and to somebody she's confiding in. I mean, I think sometimes when you confide in people, you still want to look good as well when you're confiding the worst things you've done. It's
another line that stuck out for me in the context of their relationship. Every marriage has its own rules.
I think that's true.
Can you talk about that context?
Well, first of all, every marriage is different because every individual in a marriage is different. So you can't have the same rules for all marriages. It depends on what the parties in that marriage are agreeable to. Or but you come into a marriage, it's like a contract. You have to know what you're offering and what the other person can offer you as well. It's a transaction in many ways. Emotional, yes, and sometimes financial as well, and other issues as well. So these rules are, each marriage has to find the rules that work best for that marriage. And in this book, you can see the rules are all different for all the couples, and yet they found a way to make their marriage work in their own way. They're not happy, but well.
they're not happy, but they somehow work. They get through it.
Yeah.
I think that would be true of Mom and Gerald too. They lasted until Gerald's death, right?
Well, the thing was, all the married couples in this book are unhappy because they're wearing masks. They're hiding even from their own spouses. The only person who is not wearing a mask is Gerald Haxton. He doesn't care what people think of him. He's not bothered by how society views him. And consequently, he lives the life he wants to. He says the things he wants to anyone he wants to. And he's the most liberated and happy person in this novel.
I hadn't thought of that, but I think you're.
Yes,
I think
yeah.
you're true. But is that because he's the shallowest in some ways? I feel like.
But aren't they the most happy people around? You know, the problem is when you start thinking too deeply, then you become unhappy. I've got friends who are. Yeah, I once had a friend, a guy, and he was so shallow, but he was so happy. Yeah, he was just so happy. Yeah,
But the unexamined life is not worth living, Twan.
to him it was. It was. Yeah, and I look at him and I thought, that's a lesson there that don't overthink things, just be happy, and he was.
So growing up in Penang, one of the things that strikes me about Mom's writing is there's so much of her set in what they used to call exotic locales, and he's very busily describing the rickshaws and all the hubbub that's going on around, but not actually residing with those people. So you, as a Malaysian writer writing in English, it's a very different ask. Yes. I feel.
Yeah. Well, yes, because I approach it from the other direction. I approach it from the ground level up, which is to describe things as they are, and not just because they happen to look attractive or exotic, but the descriptions there are because the streets did look like that. It's to add to the atmosphere, to add to the realism as well. They're not just because it'll look good in a movie version, but it's there to add flavor and if you notice in my writing, a lot of the times, again, the less is more rule. I don't describe how the characters are feeling. I don't say Leslie is feeling sad today. I actually use my description of the surroundings to create that unhappy mood. So I have to choose my words carefully to create this feeling in the reader subconsciously that this is she's feeling sad or she's feeling angry. So these settings are all to help with the characterization of these people in here as well.
When you see a movie like The Letter, the Bette Davis version, which is filmed entirely in a Hollywood backlot, right? What does it feel like? Because that's supposed to be Singapore, but this is clearly Hollywood's idea of Singapore.
Well, it's again, you can't take today's values and impose it on something which was created decades ago. I mean, we view it with a sort of a laugh and say, "Oh, look at that," and we have a good laugh about it. But we're aware that it was made 50 years ago, and well, we don't have a time machine. We can't go back and change things. So we just view it as a not even a relic, but a product of the times. There's no point railing against that. It's when if you do that same sort of thing today again, then you say, what's the point of doing that? So it's
a technical question before we open up to other folks' questions. Just a technical question. Leslie's story is in first person. Willie's, Somerset Mom's story, is in close third.
Yes.
What was your thinking there?
Well, initially I wanted it all to be first person because I find, as a writer, the first person voice is the most intimate. It draws the reader in immediately. It's like I'm whispering in your ear personally. I say, I'm going to tell you this fantastic story, and you're drawn to it. You want to listen more. So it's a very powerful choice for a writer to use. Whereas with a third person, it's more distancing. I tried to do that with the Somerset Maugham chapters, and I found that I couldn't do it. A, I couldn't replicate his voice. I'm not talented enough to do that. B, it just felt wrong. Maybe one of the reasons was that Somerset Maugham is such a worldly and sophisticated character. He's traveled the world. So to use a third person voice opened up the vista. and the sensation for the reader as well. This is a wider, bigger world that I'm reading about. With Leslie, because of her life is very confined and narrow and restricted. So the first person is actually the perfect choice for that, because it shows how limited her world is. She can't see beyond what she personally experiences. So it's a good contrast between these two characters, nicely balanced out.
And I noticed that the book begins and ends in South Africa, where you spent a good part of your year.
Yeah. Well, I wanted Leslie to be isolated from much of the world towards the end of the novel. I wanted to make it difficult for certain people to find her. For those of you who haven't read the book, so she's almost lost. All traces of her are almost lost. So it's difficult for people to locate her. So what better place than the Karoo in South Africa? It's so isolated, so bleak as well. Oh, again, the nice contrast between her lush home, it's so rich with color and rain, and then you go into this bleak landscape where she's stripped away of all her vanities. Now she in the book, she's a person who's obsessed with status, with appearances, and all these little who she had lunch with, who's invited her to whichever party. She's obsessed with that. But towards the end, she realizes, after living in that near desert environment, that all of these things don't matter. They don't matter at all. So in a way, it's her punishment for. Well, she's not a nice person. What do you win?
She's not
a nice. She's likable, but she's not a nice person. You can like not nice people as well, So she has to be, in a way.
Bring back Leslie, we say. Bring her back
from
her exile.
That's on a hopeful note, I think, because that last sentence was. I knew the last sentence before I really got deep into the book. I wrote down the last sentence in the notebook somewhere. Wow. Yeah, and I said, everything is aimed, every word, every scene, every development in the plot is directed towards that final sentence.
I kind of hate you for that, because I've never had a last sentence that would send everything.
Don't you know the last scene?
I do my ending, but not the last line.
Well,
so that's impressive.
In this instance, I knew that this last line. That's it. This is yes.
All right. I want to open up for questions for folks, or either online or in person.
Don't be shy. Yes.
Yes.
So intrigued by the image of Arthur's house.
The House of Doors. Yes.
That house and how that idea.
Well, the idea is more or less as I describe it in the book, how the idea for the House of Doors came to me. Whenever I'm in Penang and I'm walking the streets, I see all these beautiful turn-of-the-century buildings, and they are being either torn down or remodeled. And most of the time, the fittings, the window frames, they're thrown away or destroyed. They're very intricate and beautiful, so painted or pressed with gold leaf. And it was I felt somebody should retain these doors, store them or exhibit them. And since I'm not a billionaire, I can't do that physically in real life. That's the only way I could do it, by creating this space in this novel. And if you read the novel, it's a courtyard where all the doors are hanging on very thin wire, so they spin gently in the breeze. And it's also a kind of a maze for Leslie, because it's a maze where you can where she could enter at any point, any point in this courtyard, and exit at any point. So it's really all down to her choices, how she navigates this shifting maze.
Oh my God. There's so much symbology going on with the doors, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's people leaving, people coming in, people going.
Well, this is a door as well. When you open this
right.
cover, it's a door. It's a doorway into Leslie's story. Yeah.
Then I'll keep talking if nobody else will. So Penang is obviously it's such an incredibly complex ecosystem. It's the first British settlement
It's the first British
but
settlement.
so much caste, so much race. We've got Malay, Chinese, Tamil.
You've got yes, you've got also Siamese or Indonesians.
yeah.
Everybody came there. The
Oh,
Javanese.
Intense. And also you get the colonial, and then of course you have gender.
Yes.
So
yeah.
how do you even begin to navigate all those different strata?
Well, in this book, you mean, or in my life?
We won't go there. We won't go there. Let's talk about it in the book.
Well, in the book, now I've lost thread of my answer.
Just
how do I navigate
the complexity of Penang, a place like Penang, where so many races, so many castes, so many spheres of influence are going on?
Well, you always end up with what is required in the story. Basically, you pick and choose. As you said, it's a huge canvas that you're presented with. So how do you describe it? And I find it's the same way with when I'm doing research. For instance, if I'm doing a research on, say, the great empire of China, all its history from its beginning to the 1940s. How do I approach this? And I found that in doing research, it's always via the footnotes, where I find the little keyhole that I can go in, because it's in the footnotes where I find the most fascinating stories, little anecdotes, weird tales about weird characters doing weird things, and they say, "Well, this is interesting, this is fascinating," and I've got to put it in my book, but I have to change it so I'm not accused of stealing the story. So it's via the footnotes that you slide into the story. It gives it a human dimension, whereas with this huge canvas of events, you can't.
Why do you think the stuff is in the footnotes? What is it doing there?
I don't think, because the historian felt that it's not important enough in the march of time and march of history. Whereas actually it's really the unspoken, unnamed, faceless people who say in a revolution like Dr. Sun Yat-sen's revolution, it's actually all those people in the book, unnamed, his supporters, people writing pamphlets or spreading news, pinning up notices. Those are the unnamed people who make the events in history happen. It's not the charismatic figure or the famous one who are seen to lead the charge. It's all those people are behind it. And Leslie is one of those figures as well, and that's why she feels so resentful in the pages, in the book as well. Her obsession with being remembered by history, because she asked Maugham, for a woman to be remembered by history, she either has to be a queen or a whore. But what about a normal housewife like me? Who is going to remember me? So that's the human side that historians often.
And that's why historical novelists exist.
Yes, we fill in the gaps
to tell those stories where the record falls silent. Or
well, somebody said it best. Non-fiction history books tell us what happened. Novels tell us how the people felt. So that's where novels come in. Yeah.
Thank God.
Yes, right? Well, yeah. Otherwise, we'd be out of a living.
We have a question.
The title wasn't mine. I have to shamefully admit. I had different titles, and my editor.
What was your working title? Go.
So many. I never found a good one. I'm of this view that all of my books should have a the something of something, because I think I read somewhere in a report that books with this sort of a title do better than. Yeah. Yes.
What is it? Is it the preposition? Is it the article? What?
I don't know. It has a more gravitas and a heft, doesn't it? The something of something.
The House of Mirth.
Yeah. So I couldn't find a good title with the something of something. So I struggled, and eventually my British editor, he said, you should just call it the House of Doors. And I knew he was right, but I still resisted it, because I said, what's so unusual about the house of every house has doors? So what's so great about your title? But he was right. He was right. I think I've seen since then that it's an intriguing title, I think. Yeah.
It's funny. I don't think people, only half of my books have my titles on them. So it's there's this whole dance that happens, right, between you and the.
But sometimes you hit the title early on.
Yeah.
The Garden of Evening Mist came even before I was halfway through writing that novel. It just came like that. And when I tested out on people, and they just went, ooh, and I knew, yeah, yes.
It's a good title.
Yes, I do.
A
Yes.
good book,
And then to come up with something as good as that, with this one, it was difficult, I have to say. Yes. No questions.
Yes.
So you grew up in Penang. How do you think writing about that place and time has changed your relationship with the city as an adult and with the country as an adult?
Question is, how did Penang change your feeling about
How,
growing up there?
Yeah. How did it change my writing about Penang? How did it change? Well, I have a better appreciation of its past and of the problems it has today. You understand the causes, so you're less judgmental. And once you know the causes of something, you're less, as I said, judgmental, and you're more understanding and sympathetic. So that's yeah. Other than that, it's made me love it more, love the place more, but also sometimes makes me frustrated with it. Yes. It's very complicated, isn't it?
How often do you get back?
Almost every year.
Mm-hmm. You still have family?
Yes. And the thing with Penang is everybody knows everyone there, even if they're not related to you. And somehow we're all related in some way. It's if I meet somebody who's from Penang, somebody whom I've never met, and we start talking, and then we realize that we're somehow related somehow through somebody's cousins. It's weird. Yeah.
Are we wrapping it up, Emily?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Matt, let's all thank Tan Twan Eng for coming.
Thank you for
out
coming.
with us.
Thanks. Thank you. And thank you all the online viewers as well.
Thank you so much to all of you, and especially to Lou and Twan. I want to go back and read the book again, although maybe I will not read Of Human Bondage, which I did buy after reading the book, but
It's
I'm
really
just
long.
read the letter.
It's really long.
Instead. Yeah. I have not read the letter yet, but I have a copy of the letter. That one will be more accessible. I was so excited about Of Human Bondage though, but I think I just want to read The House of Doors for a second time. Thank you all so much. The copies that you have, if you've gotten them from us, are already signed. But as I said, if you would like for Twan to personalize it, he has graciously agreed to do it. Sarah and I will go in the back. We're going to bring out a table for that signing. If you are all willing to help us fold up these chairs and just place them against the wall, that will give us a little bit more space. And thank you again for being here.